Purposes and Functions of Art, Part 2. Art for public and personal expression. Art can help us remember or celebrate remarkable people or events in history. And art can also encourage empathy. It can help us to understand how we are all connected. Most of the monumental works in the ancient world are commemorative. For example, the Great Pyramid of Egypt served as a reminder of the absolute power of the pharaoh in the Old Kingdom. Pyramids were tombs to house and protect the royal dead. They were originally white in color and constructed in about 75 years. They were the tallest structures in the world for over 3,800 years, until the building of the Lincoln Cathedral in England. The largest of the Great Pyramids of Giza is made from 2.3 million extremely large, heavy-cut stone blocks weighing an average of 2.5 tons each, with the largest stone weighing 15 tons. Wow. It's said that when Napoleon Bonaparte visited the Great Pyramid in 1798, he calculated that there was enough stone to build a 1-foot wide, 12-foot high wall around the entire country of France. Ironically, despite their massive size and presence, the pyramids are the most colossal technological failures in history. Why? Because the tombs were all robbed in antiquity. The pyramids were built to house and protect the royal dead for the afterlife. Pyramids became monumental advertisements for the treasure they contained. Even the punishment of death didn't deter the tomb robbers. Another, more recent example of art as public expression is a Vietnam Veterans War Memorial designed by Maya Lin in 1982. She created it as part of a college architecture class that challenged students to make an entry for the National Design Competition for the planned memorial. She beat out more than 1,400 competitors, and she was just 21 years old. Instead of something heroic or celebratory, Lin imagined two stark black walls that began inside the earth, then grew and grew in height until they met like a wound that is closed and healing. It's quiet, profound, elegant, and starkly simple. Polished black granite is angled and incised with the names of almost 60,000 American soldiers who died in the conflict. It tapers down and disappears into the earth. The design was controversial because its unconventional design lacked the traditional statues and ornamentations of previous memorials. Lin wanted to create a memorial to those who died fighting the war without antagonizing the relatives of the deceased or the opponents of the war. Ironically, the work became political because she attempted to avoid politics, or rather, political imagery. The detractors called the wall a black gash of shame, and they used everything from Lin's age to her ethnicity. She is Chinese American, for the reasons that the design should be changed or abandoned altogether. The detractors wanted something traditional and grandiose with realistic statues of soldiers. Today, the wall is a popular destination for visitors to Washington, D.C. Now I'd like to talk about personal expression and one of the most vibrant characters in 20th century art, Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo was a Mexican artist who created very powerful autobiographical works that draw attention to Mexican and indigenous culture, the portrayals and experiences of women, her feelings about existence and identity, and finally, her suffering. Frida was born in the neighborhood Coyoacan in Mexico City in 1907 to a German father and a mother of Oaxacan descent. As a young child, she was disabled by polio and lived through the Mexican Revolution. She often accompanied her father, who was an architectural photographer for the Mexican government. He had epilepsy, and Frida had experienced his seizures where she would have to come to his aid. You could say that at a young age, Frida became aware of how short life is. When she was 18, She was riding a bus in Mexico City when it was struck by a trolley car. In the accident, Frida had been thrown from the bus. Her clothes had been ripped away, and she was covered by gold powder that a workman was carrying on the bus. An iron handrail had impaled her through her pelvis. Her boyfriend, Alejandro, later remembered that a man put his knee on her belly and pulled out the handrail. Frida's screams, according to Alejandro, drowned out the sirens. The iron handrail had punctured her abdomen and uterus. Her spinal column was broken in 3 places, her right leg in 11 places, her shoulder was dislocated, her collarbone was broken, her right foot was dislocated and crushed, and doctors later discovered 3 additional vertebrae had been broken as well. No one thought she would live nor walk again. Bedridden for months, Frida began to paint to fill her time. The pain from her injuries plagued Frida for the rest of her life. She had more than 30 additional surgeries, including one in which her back was rebroken and reset. She wore a brace and was prevented from walking properly. She soon met and fell in love with the famous Mexican muralist Diego Rivera. She desperately wanted children with Diego, but the accident prevented her from becoming a mother, a circumstance that severely traumatized her. It's been suggested that the animals that populate her many paintings are surrogates for the children she was unable to have. Frida and Diego's relationship was tested by mutual jealousy and infidelity. Frida knew that she was unable to control Diego, but his behavior became too much to ignore when in 1935 he slept with Frida's sister Cristina. It was the sister she loved the most. Devastated, Frida left and got her own place. They later divorced around 1940, only to remarry again that same year. She decided that if Diego was going to take lovers, then she would as well. Some men and some women. Later she would say, "There have been 2 great accidents in my life. One was the trolley, and the other was Diego. Diego was by far the worst." Despite their tumultuous relationship, Diego and Frida also shared a deep love and tenderness together. They would always return to one another and love each other the rest of their lives. In their artwork, they couldn't be more different. Where Diego painted large mural-sized works with populist themes dealing with social inequality, the relationship of nature, industry, and technology, and the history and fate of Mexico, Frida, on the other hand, painted small works dealing with subjects like death, identity, and the human body. 80% of her works are actually self-portraits. In the age of social media, she would be queen of the selfie. Let's take a look at Frida's painting, The Two Fridas, painted in 1939 shortly after her divorce from Diego. This painting seems to express her desperation and loneliness from her separation from Diego. Here, 2 differently dressed Fridas sit on a bench and stare stoically ahead while clasping hands tightly. Behind them, a cloud-filled sky suggests a coming storm. She is her only companion. The Frida on the left wears a modern European or Victorian-styled outfit, suggesting conservatism and rigidness, the kind she wore before she met Diego Rivera. On the right, the Mexican Frida is dressed in a Tijuana costume, which is more colorful and appears freer and less restricted. This is the style Diego adored. The 2 dresses symbolize 2 different cultures that were part of Frida's life, namely the European and Mexican cultures. On the left, the European Frida is abandoned, and her ripped dress painfully exposes her torn and broken heart. The Mexican Frida has a healthy heart. The 2 Fridas are united by a vein. The European Frida on the left is trying not to bleed to death while holding surgical pincers to stem the flow of blood pouring from the vein onto her white dress, while the Frida on the right holds a small portrait of Diego in her hand. In the European Frida, there is no Diego. Frida died, aged just 47, on July 13, 1954, of a pulmonary embolism. her paintings are really her greatest autobiography. Frida once explained, "I never paint my dreams or nightmares. I paint my own reality." In a life of almost unbearable physical and emotional pain, Frida Kahlo created some of the most self-expressive works of the 20th century by synthesizing her suffering into powerful works that are a testament to her amazing life. Self-expression doesn't have to use stories of suffering or even portraiture like the work of Frida Kahlo that we just looked at. Look at this work by Vasily Kandinsky called Composition 7, created in 1913. While it may first appear to be a strange jumble of colors, shapes, and marks, it comes from common feelings. Kandinsky tried to create art that did not copy anything in the external world. He wanted the forms and colors to communicate his inner state of mind without referring to anything seen. He often named his work after musical forms because he wanted to communicate as immediately as music does. Kandinsky said, quote, "Color directly influences the soul. Color is the keyboard, the eyes are the hammers. The soul is the piano with many strings. The artist is the hand that plays, touching one key or another purposely to cause vibrations in the soul." End quote. Kandinsky was one of the earliest artists to create completely abstract paintings. One of my favorite stories about Kandinsky is when he left his studio to go for a walk. While he was gone, a friend and fellow artist, Gabriele Munter, was cleaning his studio and accidentally turned one of his paintings upside down. When Kandinsky returned, he didn't recognize the painting at first, and proclaimed that it was of extraordinary beauty and glowing with radiance. This was an aha moment, if you will, for Kandinsky, which helped to change his ideas about painting and open his eyes to abstraction and the possibilities of what art could be. Turning to another function of art is art for the spirit, art to enhance religious contemplation. Most of the world's religions have discovered ways to powerfully incorporate art into their ceremonies, rituals, and places. Look at this magnificent setting. This is Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, France. It was commissioned by King Louis IX to serve as a private prayer chapel to hold his collection of relics. Relics are objects such as pieces of bone, cloth, cups, etc., items that were touched or used by a saint or martyr. This chapel supposedly held what King Louis regarded as the original crown of thorns used in Christ's trial and execution. Walking into this massive interior flooded with gorgeous glowing light from the stained glass, one would tremble like a small bird in the presence of something holy. And this was precisely the point. The awe-inspiring experience is probably not any different today than it was in 1248 when the cathedral was consecrated. Most of the towering walls are actually made of stained glass, which, in addition to being absolutely striking, also tells stories of the Bible and the discovery of the relics housed in the chapel. This is truly sublime. Let's quickly discuss this term, sublime. Sublime is something of such excellence, grandeur, or beauty as to inspire great admiration or awe. When applied to artworks, it is the supreme compliment. Now look at this work by the 19th century German romantic landscape painter Caspar David Friedrich. This painting, The Monk by the Sea, shows a small monk standing before the vastness of nature and the presence of God, a sublime scene indeed. Friedrich has practically compressed space in a manner anticipating abstract art. This painting always reminds me of the American writer and philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson, who once wrote, "But for every seeing soul, there are two absorbing facts, I and the abyss." Heavy stuff. The 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant thought that for something to be sublime, it required two qualities, grandeur and terror. But the observer must be in a place of safety. The examples he gave as potentially invoking the sublime were powerful natural events like storms or trying to apprehend the size of the universe. What can you think of that would instill a sense of the sublime? What about the Grand Canyon? Could this be perceived as sublime? It certainly fulfills Kant's idea of grandeur, but what could be the quality of terror? Falling off the edge? No, remember you have to be in a position of safety. Perhaps that to truly behold the size of the Grand Canyon, we are required to confront with profundity our small existence. With our humanity being diminished, we feel profoundly small next to something so vast. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe called nature the living garment of God. Such a poetic observation. Now let's turn to this impressive work by contemporary artist James Turrell called Roden Crater near Flagstaff, Arizona. Turrell purchased the crater in 1979 to create this majestic work, and it is set to open in the year 2024. He spent the last 45 years designing tunnels and chambers on the top of the rim of the crater to capture celestial light in all its glory. Observers can view the changing light of the sky using orientations involving the equinoxes, solstices, and moon cycles. In this work, the perception of the observer is the art in the work. His work encourages a cosmic experience of sort with changing lights from the heavens above, allowing us to have what some might suggest is a contemporary spiritual experience. In Tibetan Buddhism, a mandala is usually a circular geometric design or pattern made of colored sand that represents the cosmos or deities in various heavenly worlds. Tibetan monks use this art making as a meditative group process requiring great concentration and focused attention. Tibetan monks follow ancient traditional practices as they work up to 18-hour days for several weeks to create these beautifully elaborate mandalas. After celebrating and sharing the work, they destroy it to symbolize the impermanence of life. Buddhism views impermanence with the idea that everything changes and nothing lasts forever. Everything from our emotions to our thoughts and feelings, from the cells in our bodies to the plants around us, is changing and decaying continuously. I'd like to share one last bit of art for the spirit that means a lot to me. In 1995, my wonderful and adventurous mother, Suzanne, decided to take me for a month to the mystical island of Bali to explore and study their art and culture. It was my first time out of the country, and the experience left a powerful impression on me. It was one of the most memorable experiences of my life, and I'll always be grateful she gifted this to me. The island of Bali is in a chain of islands that are part of the country Indonesia. It's about 8 degrees below the equator and about 4 hours north of Australia. The dominant religion in Indonesia is Islam. However, the island of Bali is Hindu mixed with animism, which is a kind of nature worship. The trees, the river, rocks, and mountains all have spirits. The Balinese create very expressive masks for dramatic performances that celebrate their ancient Balinese mythology in Hindu religion. I'd like quickly to expose you to a clip of Balinese dancers. Female Balinese dancers are trained from a young age and are taught to dance with their hands before they can walk. They dress in bold colors and glittering opulence as they click, pop, and sway to the traditional Balinese music from the gamelan band. Using dynamic, angular, and intensely expressive movements and expressions, they use their bodies, hands, and eyes to captivate their audiences. Their movement is closely aligned to the rhythms produced by the highly percussive gamelan band. Wiggling their little fingers, I was told, is a sign of being feminine. Even without knowing the Balinese language or understanding their stories, their dances are absolutely hypnotic. some of the most amazing performances I've witnessed. Even while creating this lecture and rewatching these clips, I am moved and have goosebumps remembering my experience. Just mesmerizing. The Balinese are a true artisan culture, which means everyone is an artist. From performing as a dancer, actor, musician in a gamelan band, to creating textiles working with metal or leather, to painting and wood carving, everyone is an artist. In fact, there is no word for art in the Balinese language. Masks are created using rituals and purification blessings as they are being created. Each village carefully stores their masks until needed for performances. The Balinese believe that masks are powerful receptacles of wandering spirits as well as representations of witches, gods, animals, and people. They believe that when you wear a mask, that it possesses you. To create masks, the Balinese artists will use wood from a pule tree. They don't cut down a sacred tree, but rather remove a lump off of the tree so it will later regenerate. If there are 2 lumps pulled off of a tree and they're made into masks, they will be considered sibling masks. The trees can grow in temples and graveyards. This raises an interesting question. Where do the tree's roots go to? To one's ancestors, of course. Balinese artists will carefully apply up to 40 coats of paint and sometimes up to 150 layers for a single sacred mask, which creates a very lustrous surface. When complete, the mask is given an elaborate purification ceremony to rid it from the uncleanliness accumulated in the process of creation. As you can see, the bulging eyes or expressive tautness is a hallmark feature of the Balinese style. As you can see, these are quite amazing works. Many of these adorn my walls as decorations, yet they were born from the idea of art for the spirit. Art for political purposes. From persuading others to submit to authority, to protest or encourage revolt, artists in many societies have sought to criticize or influence values or public opinion through their work. Political and religious leaders have long understood and used the power of art to extend and intensify their messages to the masses. The widespread access of photography, film, and television in the 20th century have greatly enhanced this development. Take, for example, the work of German documentary filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl. In her 1934 film, Triumph of the Will, Riefenstahl created what Hitler ordered, a highly effective instrument for political propaganda. Riefenstahl always shot Adolf Hitler from a lower vantage point, which made him look larger, implying power. But she shot the masses from an aerial perspective in order to signify their subordination. Her films were very successful political propaganda for Hitler. The elephant in the room is, what is an artist's moral responsibility? What is the impact of such a powerful artistic statement on humanity? Riefenstahl used her great talent to influence the hearts and minds of millions of people with disastrous results. Now, I'd like to share with you a famous and beautiful photograph, Tomoko in a Bath by W. Eugene Smith. This powerful work was used to draw attention to the victims of Minamata disease, which is mercury poisoning. The Chiso Corporation in Minamata, Japan, was polluting the water and sea life of which people depended on. This led to the deaths of over 2,000 Japanese and led to Tomoko being born with this disease. This photograph quickly gained worldwide attention. The photographer, Smith, was even attacked and beaten by Yakuza, hired by Chiso, the polluting corporation. Now, I'd like to ask you a question in relation to this beautiful work. What's the difference between the term beautiful and pretty? Words are our servants, not our masters, as we use them in a lot of different ways. But I'd like you to think about this for a moment. I would suggest the term pretty is more about surface, like admiring a pretty outfit. But I'd argue that something like this photograph is beautiful because it has qualities of a higher order. What are qualities of a higher order, you might ask? When initially looking at this photograph, most viewers are startled and disturbed by the distorted landscape of Tomoko's body. Her deformities are more pronounced with such dramatic and focused lighting. Initially, we are heartbroken. But look closely at the mother. She doesn't see what we see. She's gently cradling her child as she gazes tenderly at her face with unconditional love. I would suggest perhaps that these abstract ideas and powerful feelings are those qualities of a higher order that make this image of a tragedy quite beautiful and remarkable. This political work by the Cuban-American artist Félix González-Torres is called Untitled: Death by Gun. Here the artist printed on large sheets photographs and information on all of the victims of gunfire in the United States in a randomly selected week. In this work, there are 460 individuals during the week of May 1st to the 7th in 1989. The artist created what he called endless copies, which were then placed and stacked on the floor of the gallery free for the taking by the viewers. The artist stated that, "I need the public to complete the work. I ask the public to help me, to take responsibility, to become a part of my work, to join in." The last work I'd like to share with you is The Raft of the Medusa, which is an imposing oil painting by the French Romantic artist Théodore Géricault. It's 16 feet high and 23.5 feet wide, which contributes to the delivery of its powerful story. The painting depicts survivors from the ship Medusa in the aftermath of a shipwreck. In 1816, the ship ran aground on a sandbank about 60 miles off the coast of West Africa. This was due to the incompetence of the captain, who received his appointment simply because of political connections to the French bureaucracy. The Medusa carried 400 people, but there was only space for about 250 in the lifeboats, which carried the captain and his crew. The remaining 150 passengers were left with a makeshift raft that was to be towed by the other ship with an intention of getting to the coast. For reasons hazy in the historical record, the sailors soon cut loose the tow rope and left the raft behind. They were lost at sea for 13 days, and only 15 of the 150 passengers survived. The survivors told a story of maddening thirst, despair, mutiny, and cannibalism. Crazed, they killed the weakest, fought each other, and ate their companions. The strongest made their way to the center of the raft, the weakest fell to the edges of the submerged raft to be claimed by the sea. Géricault's work was a critique on the status quo or existing state of affairs, which caused a scandal for the newly restored French monarchy that was struggling after the empire of Napoleon. The painting stirred the public and offended the royalists, but supporters of Napoleon were delighted, believing that Géricault was glorifying their struggle against the monarchy. The work is also an expression of Géricault's abolitionist sympathies, as he placed Jean-Charles, a black soldier who was one of the few survivors, at the top of the pyramidal heap of bodies. For this work, Géricault really did his research. He studied corpses, interviewed survivors, and had a full-scale model of the raft constructed in his studio. From a local morgue, he even brought severed limbs back to his studio to study their decay. And for 2 weeks, he borrowed a severed head from a lunatic asylum. He stored the head on the roof of his studio. He became a student of death. Talk about dedication. As we have seen, art penetrates the very fabric of our culture and lives. It meets so many of our needs and has the power to shape our lives in so many ways. This concludes our lecture on the purposes and functions of art, Part 2. Thank you.